So, I've figured this out. This is January 2024, and I figured out we are nearly a quarter of the way through the century. How about that? Where did that time go? We're in this series that we've called How Do I? Because traditionally at the start of a year, January, people do crazy things in January. People couples get together and say, what are our big goals for this year? I know, let's move the house a little bit to the left. And when they decide to do those crazy things, the first thing they do is they go to the YouTubes or they go to point their interweb machines towards the question, how do I? Because I don't know how to do this. And so in this series, we want to give you some reliable answers, not YouTube answers or Google answers. We want to give you some reliable answers to some of the biggest questions that get asked in January when people want to make a change. So next week, one of my good friends, a man called Chris Porter, who's part of our Further Faster team, he's also a minister of a church in Andover in Hampshire. He's coming next week and he's going to talk about how do I live a better life in 2024. Last week, if you were tracking with us last week, I was here and I loved last week. Last week we talked about how do I stay out of trouble in 2024. And some of you have been redrawing some lines. Some of you have been recounting some costs, and some of you have been revealing the mess. How's that going for you? Because that's a dangerous place to be, but it's the place where you find a little bit of freedom. This week, I want to talk about how we can make happy happen. How do we find happiness in 2024? That's what I want to talk about this week. And in order for me to do that, to start with, I'm going to have to sing a little song, which is frightening because I can't sing a note. So you're going to have to help me. You're going to have to help me with the last line, okay? Here's a little song I wrote. You might want to sing it note for note. Don't worry. Be happy. Well done. Give yourselves a round of applause. Fantastic. That's so good. The thing is, if you Google happy songs, you get millions of them. Millions and millions of happy songs. Why? Because the pursuit of happiness is something that is universal. It's not reserved to one kind of age group or one kind of people group or one nation. Everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants to find that elusive thing that they call happiness. And it's understandable why people want to be happy, because psychologists tell us that becoming happy actually has a lot of benefits. Psychologists tell us that happy people live longer. Happy people have healthier lives. Happy people have more success. Happy people, apparently, according to psychologists, have stronger relationships. Happy people say yes more frequently. Happy people say that being happy changes the way they see the world. So by a show of hands, how many of us would say you are happy this morning? It's not really a thank you. Some of you are like, yes. Some of you are like, I think I am. Some of you are like, definitely not. It's a difficult question to answer, isn't it? We all want this elusive thing called happiness, but can we actually make happy happen? Well, apparently we can. 2,000 years ago, there's a man called Paul who became the Apostle Paul. This is what you need to know about Paul. Paul hated Christians. He was known as a Christian killer. Whenever Paul saw a Christian, he would kill him. And then he met Jesus, and everything got turned upside down. And Paul moved from being a Christian killer to a church creator. And so Paul started churches all over the known world, and he wrote letters back to those churches because obviously he couldn't be with them all of the time. And the church in this Roman province or this Roman city called Philippi were getting a bit screwy when it came to this idea of making happy happen, being happy. And so Paul wrote them a letter to help them understand happiness. And he says this in Philippians chapter 4. He says, I'm glad in God, far happier than you would ever guess. Actually, he says, I don't have a sense of needing anything personally. I've learned by now to be quite content, whatever my circumstances. He says, I'm just as happy with as little as with much as with little. I've found the recipe. I've learned to be content. I've found the recipe, he says, for being happy, whether full or hungry, hands full or hands empty. Whatever I have, wherever I am, I can make it through anything in the one that makes me who I am. So Paul says, happiness can be found. Contentment is something that can be learnt. So let's try and find the secret sauce this morning. Let's try and learn how we can be content in 2024. I have 3 boys. My 3 boys are all grown up, married, and, well, one of them isn't yet, but they've all left home. So it's just me and Debbie at home. But when they were younger, when they were little kids, we saved up for ages and we went on a big family holiday to Spain. My wife works for the NHS, I work for a church, so we did it on the cheap, obviously. We booked a Ryanair flight from Stansted Airport, and it was the cheapest Ryanair flight we could find, so we landed at midnight in Alicante, these 3 young boys with me as well. And of course, we'd rented the smallest car you could rent, like a Fiat 500 or whatever it was, a tiny little car, because it was the cheapest. And we stood in line at this desk, waited for ages until it came to my turn to go to the desk and pick up the keys to my rented car. And as I got to the desk, this lovely lady in her best Spanglish said, "I'm sorry, sir, but we've run out of cars." And you can imagine, I was just like, I'm tired, I've got these 3 kids, it's midnight, we just want to get to where we're staying. You're joking me. No cars. She said, no, we've run out of cars in your category. We're going to have to upgrade you for free. Result. So she gives me the keys to a BMW Series 1. I mean, I had never, ever driven a car like that in my life. So you go into the car park, you find the car, we had plenty, rather than having bags around our ears like it would have been in the Fiat 500, we had plenty of room for all our luggage. The kids sat in the back and go, "Oh, Dad, this is amazing." We sat in the car, but I'd never driven a car like this before. There was nowhere to put my key. And I couldn't figure out how you start the thing. And then I noticed on the side there was a button that said start. So I pushed the button. Nothing happened. I kept pushing the button, nothing happened. I could make the windscreen wipers go. I could make the indicators go. The horn worked perfectly. I couldn't start the engine. So I had to go back into this kind of office place, find this girl that would give me the keys, and I had to say to her, "I can't make the car start." And, you know, she's 18, I was in my 40s. It was just a little bit embarrassing, really. So she comes out and she says, "So you just need to put your foot on the brake first." And then the car, I mean, who knew? Put your foot on the brake, then you push the button, it comes to life. I didn't know that. I felt so stupid. I said, "I'm really sorry, I had no clue. It's so simple. I can make the windscreen wipers go, I can make the horn go, I can make the indicator lights go. I'm sorry I couldn't make the engine go." She goes, "Don't worry, sir, it's fine." She said, "You were just pushing all the wrong buttons." And the phrase stuck with me, pushing all the wrong buttons. You know, it's a scientific fact that as human beings, when we push the right buttons in life, we discover happiness. We live a kind of life that is happy. But unfortunately, like me and that BMW, we spend so much of our lives pushing the wrong buttons, thinking it's going to make us happy, but nothing happens. It's dead. We don't get happy. So we think to ourselves, you know what? The button that I need to push this year to make me happy is I need to get on a diet. If I could just do this diet and stick with it beyond January the 15th, then I will be happy. Then I will be happy. We think maybe if I could make more money, if I could put a few more noughts onto my bank account, then I would be happy. You know, if I could just find that someone special in my life, then I would be happy. If we could have kids, then I would be happy. If I could get a promotion, then I would be happy. If I could move to that corner office in the building, then I would be happy. Maybe if I could get a new house or live in that special postcode round here, then I would be happy. If I could just look like a supermodel when I looked at myself in the mirror, if I could be famous even for 15 minutes, then I would find contentment, then I would find happiness. And scientific research shows that none of these things that we chase after so often, none of these things bring us the sustained happiness we're desperate for. In other words, these are all the wrong buttons to push if you want to make happy happen. Apparently, happiness is available to all of us if only we knew which buttons to press. I bet you're glad you came to this church this morning, because I'm going to tell you exactly what buttons you need to press to make happy happen. And I can tell you it because there's been a huge amount of clinical research done on this recently. There's a man called Dr. Ed Diener. Ed Diener is known as Mr. Happy. And here's why. He's the world expert on happiness. He's the president of the International Psychological Society. In fact, a few years ago, the BBC did 7 programs with him called the Happiness Formula. I'm sure you can still find it on the iPlayer somewhere. And he basically said that in these programs, he said over the past 100 years, we've been trying to figure out why people are depressed. We've put so much research and energy onto depressed people. What causes depression? Why are people depressed? Why are people addicted? Why are people anxious? There's been reams and reams and reams of study done to figure out, looking at depressed people and trying to figure out why they're depressed. And he said no one ever looked at happy people and tried to figure out why happy people are happy. So he went ahead and changed the system. He went ahead and did that. He spent a decade studying happiness. So there's been a huge raft of research done on the subject of what makes people happy. And Ed Diener says this in one of those BBC programs. He said this: "It's interesting to me that the majority of people spend the majority of their time pursuing happiness along a path that yields the least amount of increase in their actual happiness factor." In other words, Ed Diener says we spend all our time pushing the wrong buttons, thinking it's going to make us happy, but it doesn't. He says that research promises that 10% of our happiness comes from external stuff. 10% comes from that external stuff. We buy a new car thinking that's going to make me happy. But the new car smell wears off, right? Pretty quickly. And it doesn't bring us the sustained happiness that we're looking for. Ed Diener says that sustained happiness can be found, but it comes from certain life practices. It comes from pushing the right buttons. So what are these life practices? What are these life choices? What are these buttons that we need to press in order to find happiness? Well, there are two. There are two main ones. He identified a few more, but I want to talk about the top two. These are the right buttons to press if in 2024 you want to make happy happen in your life. If you want happiness to be part of what you do. First one, he says, first one, happy people have more friends. Happy people have more friends. It's not rocket science. You're thinking, God, they paid Duncan to come and teach us this? It's not rocket science. Happy people have more friends. So part of their study is they got a monkey to prove their theory. They got a monkey and they wired this monkey up with electrodes so they could test the stress levels in this monkey. Because apparently when we get stressed, there's a chemical reaction that happens in our body. And stress is a good thing. If you're standing on a railway track and there's a train coming towards you, you want your brain to have a chemical reaction that causes a bit of stress. So you go, I need to run. Because if you didn't have stress, you'd stand there thinking, I wonder if that train would hit me. You know? So you want a little bit of stress. Stress is a good thing. So they put these electrodes on this monkey to test his stress levels. They put him on in a cage and they started to rattle the cage. They started to shine bright lights into the cage. They started to make loud sounds into the cage. And as they monitored him, his stress levels went through the roof because his cage was being rattled, there was noise, there was lights. His stress levels went off the chart. You know what they did next? They opened the door to his cage. They didn't turn the lights off. They didn't turn the sound off. They didn't stop rattling it. They just opened the door to the cage and they put another monkey in alongside him. Shut the door again. And as they monitored him, his stress levels reduced by over 50%. Nothing changed apart from the fact that there was another monkey in the cage with him. So I want to ask you a question, the most profound question you're going to be asked this January, and it's this: who's your monkey? Honestly, who's your monkey? You have to have a monkey to do life with. I mean, life gets stressful, right? Life gets difficult. Even Jesus talked about it. John chapter 16. Jesus says, in this godly world, you will continue to experience, in this godless world, you will continue to experience difficulties. Our world is godless. Our world is tough. And you will continue, as sure as eggs is eggs, to find difficulties. You will find in your life, obviously, that your cage gets rattled more often than you want it to be. So who's your monkey? Who's your monkey? Don't do it alone. In the Old Testament, the writer of Ecclesiastes says this: you're better off to have a friend than to be all alone. You're better off to have a friend than be all alone, because then you'll get more enjoyment out of what you earn. You'll get more enjoyment out of life and the stuff that you have when you do it with a friend. So who's your monkey? You've got to have a monkey. Turn to the person next to you right now and say, will you be my monkey? Do you see what I'm saying? According to scientific research, huge swathes of scientific research on this hand, and according to the Bible on this hand, Your life, your performance in life, your health, your happiness levels are dependent on having a monkey to do it with, having a good friend to do it with. And you know that old phrase, who do you call at 3 a.m. when life's thrown you in a ditch? I mean, who is that for you? Could you name that person right now? Who do you call at 3 a.m. when life throws you in a ditch? Who knows you? Last week we talked a lot, didn't we, about revealing the mess. We talked about the power of confession, confessing your sins to one another, because that brings you the healing you're looking for. When you move your life out of the dark shadows and into the light, it's tough, but it brings you the kind of freedom that you're looking for. Who knows your weaknesses? Who knows those areas of your life where you're susceptible to being tripped up? Who knows your deepest, darkest secrets and still loves you? I heard a great story recently about 3 guys at church who decided they wanted to do a little bit of male bonding. So they decided to go on a fishing trip together. So they're sat in this boat, beautiful day, out on the lake, lines over the side, enjoying life. And one of them says, all right, we're good friends. Why don't we just get a little bit vulnerable and a little bit honest together and just start to reveal a bit of the mess and start to get closer, do a bit of male bonding together. Why don't we tell each other what our deepest, darkest sin is? What's our weakness? I'll kick the ball off, this guy says. He says, for me, it's lust. I can't wait for the summer, because in the summer the girls wear the little tiny crop tops. I can't wait to see a beautiful woman. I can't wait to see them walking down the street and I can look at them and lust after them. That's my weakness, lust. And I can't wait to see a beautiful woman. And so the second one says, oh, that's interesting. He says, for me, my deepest, darkest sin is money. That's my weakness. I can't wait for Friday and my paycheck. I can't wait to get that buzz when you hand money over and someone gives you a bit of stuff. I can't wait to spend the money in my pocket. I can't wait to get as much money as I can so I can spend it as fast as I can. That's my deepest, darkest sin, money. And he goes quiet and they look at the third guy and they say to him, so what's yours then? And he says, nah. They said, no, come on, we've been honest, we've told you ours. No, you don't want to hear mine. Yes, we do. We've been really vulnerable and honest. You can't just shut up and say nothing. You've got to tell us. No, I'm not going to tell you. It's too embarrassing. You're not going to like it. I'm not going to say it. And they said, please, you have to say it. You have to say it. And they begged him. So eventually the guy says, okay. Mine's gossip. And I can't wait to get back to church on Sunday and tell everybody what I've heard about in this boat today. But in all seriousness, who knows you? Who knows your weaknesses? Who knows you at that kind of level? I'm not talking about an acquaintance. I'm talking about a friend who will know your weaknesses and your deepest, darkest sins and love you anyway. Who called you at 3 a.m. when they're in a ditch? Who do you call at 3 a.m. when life has kicked you in a ditch? Sustained happiness, the kind of happiness we're looking for, comes from the life practice of good friendships. That's the number one thing. That's what we should be chasing. Especially when your cage gets rattled. So, who's your monkey? Second life practice, according to Dr. Ed Diener. Happy people have friends. Secondly, happy people are givers. Happy people are givers. It's kind of countercultural, that, isn't it? Surely happiness is when I get stuff, not when I give stuff. But Ed Diener says, no, it's the other way around. Happy people are givers. Back in the Old Testament, God speaks to his people through this prophet called Isaiah. And God says this through Isaiah 55. God says this through his prophet. He says, why spend money on what doesn't satisfy? It's the wrong button to push, God says. You keep spending your money on this stuff, thinking it's going to make you happy. It doesn't. Why spend money on what doesn't satisfy? Why spend your wages and still be hungry? You spend it on that new car, thinking it's going to make you feel happy, and it doesn't satiate you. You're still thirsty for more. Why spend your wages on that stuff? Listen to me, God says. Do what I say, and you'll enjoy the best food of all. I mean, God must look at us sometimes and be amazed at how we wear ourselves out, chasing stuff that ultimately doesn't satisfy, that doesn't quench the thirst. What if, in 2024, what if your happiness was more dependent on a give than a get? How would that change your life this coming year? What if your happiness levels were more dependent on what you give, not on what you get? What if the antidote to materialism in our society was generosity? How different would the world be in which we live? Dr. Henry Cloud, who's another psychologist, he wrote a book called The Law of Happiness. And if you are genuinely interested in what makes human beings happy, honestly, I can recommend Henry Cloud's book to you. He's a psychologist, but he's an easy read. He's a brilliant read. He's written quite a few really helpful books. And The Law of Happiness is fantastic. And he does a little experiment in his book, The Law of Happiness, to try and prove this idea that our happiness is more about a give than a get. And he says to his daughter, Olivia, who was 6 at the time, he says to his daughter, hey, Liv, I want you to help me with an experiment. Would you do that? She says, yes, Daddy, of course I will. He says, great. I'm going to make you your packed lunch to take to school today. And you're going to find an apple and some sandwiches and some crisps. And you're going to find a Kit Kat in your lunchbox as well. And it's a 2-bar Kit Kat. So what I want you to do is eat your sandwiches, eat your crisps, eat your apple. Might be a little yogurt in there as well. And then when you finish it all, you'll pick up your 2-bar Kit Kat. And what I want you to do is I want you to split the Kit Kat in half. I want you to eat half of it yourself. And I want you to give the other bar to a friend, to someone sat on a table, to a teacher, and let them enjoy the other bar. And then I want to talk about that, what happens then when you come out of school today. Are you up for doing that, Olivia? She says, yes, Daddy, I'll do that. And he tells a story about how at the end of the day, he's standing at the school gate and she's running across the playground and she's saying, Daddy, Daddy, what was that? What was that? What was that? And Dad says, what are you talking about? And she's shouting as she gets close to him. She says, I gave my Kit Kat away and I had this weird warm feeling inside of me. What was it? What was it? She discovered that happiness was more about a give than a get. Researchers found that when we give, when our lives revolve around sharing what we have, around serving and volunteering, our very chemistry changes. Something chemical happens inside of us that produces happiness. Researchers found, listen to me on this, and I hope you're not too shocked by this, but research on the brain has found, Dr. Henry Cloud talks about this, it's found that when you give, the same pleasure centers are stimulated when you give that get stimulated when you eat great food or have great sex. There's a lot of benefit in being generous givers. Because when you give, that same little pleasure center in your brain gets stimulated, that gets stimulated when you go to a Gordon Ramsay restaurant and eat a beautiful meal, or you have fantastic sex. The same pleasure centers. God has wired you in such a way that you get a real boost of happiness when you're generous. That's how we're wired. It makes happy happen. So again, this guy called Paul, he started a church in a place called Corinth, and he writes letters back to these Corinthian Christians, and he's trying to help them understand the value of generosity. And in 2 Corinthians 9, he says this, remember this, Paul says to the Corinthian Christians. In other words, this is really important, stick it on your fridge door. Don't forget this one, all right? You might have read my other letters and other bits of letters and forgotten all about it. This one is one you need to underline and read 3 times. Remember this. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. If you're not generous, no one's going to be generous to you. And whoever sows generously will reap generously. Pleasure centers get activated when you sow generously. So let me ask you, the second most important question that you'll be asked in January. Not who's your monkey, but what's your Kit Kat? What is God asking you? What do you have that God is asking you to share? Really? Some of you have eaten the Kit Kat. That's absolutely fine. There's probably some more floating about that you found on your chair. Others of you still have that Kit Kat. If you still have that Kit Kat, do the experiment. Go home today and give it to somebody else around the table at tea time. Or put it in your lunchbox tomorrow. Get into the office and try and give that other bar away to someone else in the office or in the school playground or wherever you might find yourself. And just see what happens as you're generous with your chocolate. Honestly, what is God saying to you about what your Kit Kat is? What's your Kit Kat? What do you have that you can share so that those pleasure centers get activated and you make happy happen? the end of the Second World War, obviously London was destroyed. And there was a lot of poverty around. There were a lot of orphans walking around the streets in London. And there's a brilliant story told about one little orphan lad who was standing at the bakery window. He didn't eat much ever, didn't have a family to go back to, lived in sheer poverty, and he stood in the bakery window and he watched as the baker took a tray of fresh hot buns out of the oven and he put them in the window of the bakery. And this little scruffy lad stood there looking at those buns thinking, oh man, they look delicious. You could see the heat coming off of them. Just at that moment, one of those American Jeeps came round the corner with an American serviceman in. And he saw this little lad in the bakery. And the American serviceman pulled up his Jeep, walked into the bakery, bought the entire tray of buns. And the baker put them in a big bag. And the American serviceman walked out, tousled the little boy's hair and said, there you go, sonny, and gave them to the lad. And he turned and walked away. And the little lad, stunned, ran after him and pulled his greatcoat. And the serviceman turned round and the little lad looked up to him and he said, excuse me, sir, but are you God? You see, you're never more like God than when you give. Some of us as Christians are trying to spend the whole of our lives being more like God, and that's a great thing. And we think, I will be more like God, I'll be more like Jesus if I could know every book of the Bible and recite every verse. It's not true. I would be more like Jesus if I could sing all the words to the songs on Sunday morning without looking at the screens because I knew them off by heart. It's not true. You are never more like God, like the character and nature of your Heavenly Father, than when you give your Kit Kat away to somebody else. You're never more like God than when you give. It's what brings happiness to us. It's the character of God in you. God so loved the world that he started a Bible study. God so loved the world that he gave. He gave. It's part of who he is, and he's made you in that way as well. It's what makes happy happen. But what if it's not about being generous with our money, but being generous with our time and our talents? Again, in this letter, Paul writes to these Corinthian Christians who are getting a bit screwy on generosity. He says this in 1 Corinthians 12. Now you are the body of Christ, and each of you has a part to play. Listen, I want to talk to those of you that would say you are part of this church, New Life Church here. Some of you are here because you've been dragged along. You've got to listen to this guy. Some of you are watching this YouTube clip because someone says, hey, you need to listen to this talk from Sunday. And if you've been forced to do it, I'm really sorry. I am sorry. But you're here anyway. You don't have to do anything I say. Of course you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything anybody tells you to do. You have to live your life and make your choices in the way that you decide. But for those of us who would call yourselves a Christian, a Jesus follower, and part of this church, Paul says, you're the body of Christ. You have a part to play. So let me ask you, are you a spectator at New Life or are you a participator? And I don't mind what age you are. I'm just asking you, are you a spectator or are you a participator? If you get to know me, you'll know that one of my biggest loves in life is football. I've played football all my life. I've coached football all my life. I've even been a referee. Gave that up pretty sharpish. But I love football. I live near Ipswich Town. And for years, yeah, exactly. Or as some people call it, Ipswich Town nil. Yeah, I know. So I live very near Ipswich Town, and I love going to watch Ipswich play. I love going to Portman Road and sitting in the seats and, you know, smelling the grass and the cold weather and watching the team play. I love seeing these professionals control the ball on their chest, lay a pass off, head the ball in the back of the net. I love it. You know, I love watching it on TV. I loved last night watching Man City, Newcastle. What a game of football that was. I just love it. I love watching football on TV from my sofa or from the stands watching live football. I love Saturday afternoons going to watch my 25-year-old son play football for his local team, standing on the touchline just watching him play. I love it. But if you were to say to me, Duncan, you can either go and watch Ipswich play or your son play or go watch Man City, Newcastle, or you could put a pair of boots on yourself and have a game. I'm playing every time. There's nothing more fun than playing the game itself. There's nothing more fun than coming out of the seats, getting down from the stands, walking down the gangways and onto the pitch and being part of the action. I worry sometimes that for some of us in church, We're sat in the stands. We're watching everybody else run around. And the fun, the excitement, the happiness comes when we're generous with our talents and we're generous with our time and we get on the pitch and we start playing. There's something better about being involved than just watching. So, research says that the life practice of giving brings the sustained happiness and contentment that we're looking for. So let me land this. 2 big questions. Who's your monkey? What's your Kit Kat? Who's your friend? What are you going to do to pursue that kind of friendship? What's your Kit Kat? What is it that God is asking you to be generous with? And I know for some of us, maybe we have been in that place where we've been chasing happiness in all the wrong places. We've been pushing all the wrong buttons. And because we've been pushing all the wrong buttons, we find ourselves in a place we never intended to be. We've pushed the wrong buttons thinking if we buy more stuff, it will make us happy. And now we're in debt and it's making us sad. Maybe we thought our happiness would come in a whole bunch of different relationships. And now we've just got a whole raft of toxic relationships surrounding us. Maybe we've got into some addictive behavior because we think that's going to bring us happiness. Maybe we've got some poor self-image about ourselves now. Maybe our anxiety and our stress and our depression levels are rising because we're trying to find happiness in all the wrong places. If that's where you feel right now, I want you to listen to what Jesus would say to you. Isaiah 55, is anyone thirsty? I mean, are you like not satisfied and there's something deep within that's looking for some satisfaction? Are you thirsty? Jesus says, come and drink, even if you've got no money. Come and take your choice of wine or milk. It's all free. If you're thirsty at the start of 2024, if you want a life that's satisfying, Jesus says, come to me, drink from me. And when you turn the price tag over to find out how much it's going to cost you, it's free. My grace, my goodness, my salvation for you, it's free. So let me finish with this thought. Can you kind of almost hear the God of heaven? Can you almost hear Jesus saying, if you trust me, if you come to me, if you drink from me, no matter how thirsty your soul, I will make something beautiful out of the dust of your life. I'll make happy happen.
Could all that is lost